Welcome to Talk Sabotation to Me, Season 2. My name is Michelle.
And my name is Anisha. Tune in every Thursday at 5 p.m. Central and hear us react to each other's stories about mental health and growing up in different South Asian households.
And remember, this podcast is not therapy. Engage with what feels entertaining and resonates with you, and leave what doesn't.
Alrighty, let's get started. Today, our letter is S.
Yes.
Are you ready for our topic reveal? I guess you know our topic. Our listeners don't.
Yes, we are. I'm ready.
Our topic today is on self-sabotage.
Ooh. That sounds like a title of like a horror movie. Self-sabotage. Coming soon.
Oh, the theater is near you. That's so funny. Oh my gosh. I actually thought of this topic because I recently have been thinking a lot about self-sabotaging behaviors because I see them a lot in like therapy, like with my clients. And so I did a post on it recently. And so I was really excited because I loved what I came up with and other people loved it. So I was like, I want to talk about this more. And we happen to be on the letter S. So I was like,
there you go.
Timing.
Perfect timing.
Exactly. So on today's topic with self-sabotage, we're going to follow our usual, structure. We're going to start with our little definitions, some background, examples, what it looks like, what not to do to not self-sabotage, and also talk a little bit about how it might relate in our South Asian community, and we'll end with our stories.
I'm ready.
You ready? Here we go.
Yes.
So self-sabotage. Basically, self-sabotaging behavior refers to a intentional action or inaction that undermines people's progress and prevents them from accomplishing their goals. And self-sabotage usually occurs as a way to like hinder success, but not always like consciously on purpose. More often than not, it's very unconscious. Like you don't realize you're doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
I didn't think about that. Like, I feel like I knew self-sabotage, but I didn't think, I mean, it makes sense that it is unconscious. It can be unconscious. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm sure
nobody does it actively. They self-sabotage actively.
Exactly. That's what I was going to say. Like, as you're talking about your story, I'm sure you're going to be like, oh yeah, I didn't do this on purpose. This just kind of happened. Yeah. So behavior is basically said to be self-sabotaging when it creates problems, typically in like day-to-day life, and it interferes with those long-standing goals that we were talking about. So the most common self-sabotaging behaviors, like really, really most common, what they look like is procrastination, self-medication through, like substance use or things like that, comfort eating even, and sometimes on like extreme behaviors, like forms of self-injury can be considered self-sabotage too. Yeah. And, like we said, right, sometimes these are very conscious choices, but more often than not, they are pretty unconscious. We really like to talk about like root causes, right, on our podcast. So I thought I could highlight that for a quick second. Some of the root causes of self-sabotaging behavior, they stem typically from like childhood issues and or prior relationships and the baggage essentially that we take from those. Other reasons for this type of destructive behavior, though, tend to happen from like low self-esteem, which is a pretty big one in how self-sabotaging behaviors come about, is that low self-esteem kind of feeds into it, as well as just an inability to have healthy coping skills. Self-sabotaging tends to come from more like maladaptive, unhealthy coping. For example, self-medicating.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about this, and I think I also saw this somewhere in the research. I didn't know where, so I didn't write it down, but the idea is basically fueled by this kind of concept that we call cognitive dissonance. So what that basically means is that, if we have this narrative in our head about who we are,
right,
generally speaking, our bodies like to align with that story we tell ourselves. So if we're constantly told growing up, I don't know, like something like you are a good person and you're kind and you're, flexible and you're caring and all of those things, your body's going to want to be that. So you might tend to go towards more people-pleasing behaviors because you want to like hold this idea that I'm kind, I'm caring, I'm flexible. So if I do what I want instead of what this person wants, what if they don't think I'm kind? What if they don't think I'm caring? So that cognitive dissonance, our body doesn't like that.
Right.
So that's how we tend to like self-sabotage, is when our thoughts, our beliefs, even if they're not necessarily like true or that like all or nothing,
Yeah.
they really want to align in actions. We like that self-fulfilling, not self-fulfilling prophecy, but like, we like that self-fulfilling statements. So we're going to seek out behaviors that are very much in alignment with the thoughts that we have up here.
This is okay. This is really abstract. Can you say it in an example?
Yeah,
Like,
we'll take a different example.
okay. Okay.
So an example of this would be, let me think of a different
I'm
example.
testing your therapist brain right now.
I know, right? You're putting me on the spot.
I know.
I think a good example maybe of this would be to talk about like fear of failure, right?
Okay.
So
That's a big
let's say in
one.
like a work setting, right? You
Okay.
have this goal that you set for yourself to have a promotion this year. And then there's this really big
Um,
account that you've been working on that would basically like make or break for you in getting this promotion.
okay.
Because you have this deeply instilled fear of failure, because you're constantly pushed for perfection. And if you got like a 95, maybe your parents or like somebody had expected you to get 100. And so you like inherently fear any kind of failing, even if it's something
Mm,
really good. Then you can tend to like self sabotage so you don't align with that truth
mm,
that you are failing. So what ends up happening, right? Like, let's say there was this big presentation that's coming up that like really hinges on your promotion.
right.
Because that fear of failure is just so large, subconsciously you might make like unhelpful choices
Mm,
beforehand. For example, maybe you go
not
out partying the night before instead of getting a
mm,
good night's rest and preparing for it. And so now you've
right.
like, maybe that won't mess you up completely, but you've self-sabotaged in a way,
Mm-hmm.
because your body's like, I'd rather not know that I'm not good enough, like I've been told all
Yeah.
throughout my life, right?
So I
So
would rather just like not be good enough. Like
yeah, you
I'd
just don't
rather
want to.
fail than have the chance of failing. Like I would rather fail than have the chance to fail
Yeah,
or chance to
subconscious.
not fail. Yeah,
Yeah.
subconsciously. Oh,
Like, you don't
okay.
want to fail, but these subconscious like parts of you that want to
Yeah.
protect you from the possibility of fearing and the pain of the possibility
Yeah.
of failing, they kind of jump in. They're like, well, it's not going to be a big deal, because then if you just say that, oh, it's because I went partying and like it's because of that that I didn't get this promotion,
So
then
it's
it's
like if
almost
people
like,
in relationships almost like if you have that like you feel unworthy to or you feel unworthy to be like in a positive honest relationship
mhm,
or you don't like deserve that so then you kind of put yourself in relationships that
yep, that you
make you
deserve
that
better.
yeah,
Yeah. Or start pushing people away, even though you want them to kind of come in
right.
and be cared for. You're like, no, I don't want it. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. See, you got it now.
Thank you.
Did I pass the test?
Yes, well you were teaching me so I clearly got it.
Yeah, but you were putting me on the spot, right? Testing
Well,
my
but
powers.
actually wasn't able to I mean I've heard of cognitive
Mhm.
dissonance and I've like read about it but
Yeah.
it like hasn't I haven't fully been able to like concretely grasp it. And so this was
Mhm.
helpful. Thank
Good. I passed the test then.
you. Yes, you did.
Self-proclaimed passing of the test. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit more about like the self-sabotage as coping mechanism, right? So
Okay.
basically, this self-sabotaging behaviors, they tend to serve as coping mechanisms because, like we talked about, right? If there's a stressful situation,
Mm-hmm.
and usually it's linked to some kind of past trauma or some kind of emotional wound from the past, when we don't know how to navigate healing those wounds, when we don't know how to lean on the more healthier coping,
Mm-hmm.
our body still needs to cope with it somehow. So if we don't
Right.
direct it towards healthier, more adaptive coping, they fall back on these maladaptive coping styles.
Mm-hmm. We talked about that already
Exactly. That's a good
in a
callback.
previous episode.
Yeah. And that's a good callback to that. But that's a type of self sabotage, is engaging in those maladaptive coping.
Makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So I want to continue talking about like other kinds of common self-sabotaging behaviors. We talked about, was it procrastination first? Yeah,
Yes,
I
I
think we talked
think
about
it was. Yeah.
procrastination. So procrastination, and where there's procrastination, there's also perfectionism usually, as we've also talked about to a different episode. Then, like you talked about, it also shows up in relationships. It definitely
Right.
can. And like my example, it can show up in work situations.
Right.
It can show up with our finances. It can show
Mm-hmm.
up with our concept of like time. It can show up with our comfort with change. Lots of different examples and how
It
we
can be
can, and
everywhere.
where we can, what was
Like a
that?
horror, it's like it can be everywhere. It's like a horror movie, like
You
I'm
can't
telling
see it,
you.
you can feel it. This is, yeah, more and more this is making sense to me. This is a horror movie for, oh yeah. We need some like creepy music in the background. So it can show up, you know, like literally anywhere, and more often than not, because we're also not very aware, because it is subconscious, sometimes we just aren't aware that we're doing it. We're not aware of why it's happening, and we can tend to get stuck in these cycles that we're in. We get stuck in where we're at, and we don't know why we're stuck.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's good to be aware about this.
Yeah, exactly.
Because
And
it's
we'll talk a little bit about that,
unconscious. Yeah.
because it's subconscious. Yeah. So if you know, really don't pay attention, if you don't try to be mindful, it's easy to miss. And you're just like, why is this happening again and again?
Yeah. Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit more about fleshing out these examples that we talked about. So I'll start with procrastination. Procrastination is usually something that people who self-sabotage do because it's another way to like basically put off the thing that you're afraid of not wanting to know what's going to happen, right? Because if you think about it, self-sabotaging happens because it's like a self-protective thing. So if you have a lot of fear about what's going to happen, then we're going to want to procrastinate that from happening.
Yeah.
We don't want to know. And usually these kinds of things, they're pretty much tied to like fear of disappointing other people, fear of failing, and in a very surprise twist, fear of success also, because of what success might mean to them.
Fear of success.
Yeah. Then there's perfectionism, right? Like we were talking about. So perfectionism, again, if you remember from our callback episode, it's all about holding ourselves to impossible standards, not high standards, impossible standards.
Yes.
Obviously, because it is impossible, it will inevitably lead to delays and setbacks, and you know, it's wrapped up in procrastination like we used to talk about, right? Yeah, no, that's it. That's all I have to say. They're tied together.
No, they are tied together. They are, absolutely. They really are. If you strive for perfectionism, that's basically impossible or unattainable standards. And subconsciously, you know that you can't attain those impossible standards, and you're going to procrastinate because it's hard to accept that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And you don't want to start the thing until it's perfect, but then it's not perfect. So then you wait. But then if you start and it's not good, then that means like you're not doing well. But then you can't start. It's a vicious cycle. And the other example was the self-medicating, right? So we talked about how self-medicating, like through substances or even like sometimes self-injury, those are also maladaptive coping techniques.
Yes.
Right? Because in a way, they serve a function. Even self-injury, it serves a function. It's just not healthy or adaptive for you. But it's a way to cope still.
I think it could be the other side too. Like, you know how people who do need medication, you know, like to function and to cope regularly, or like have emotional regulation, like those people that medication is required, right? Antidepressants or anti-anxiety medication. So people like that say like they start taking the medication and then they're like, oh, I'm better, so I'm going to stop taking the medicine. And that could be like a subconscious self-sabotage as well. They're like, oh, I'm better, I don't need to take the medicine, and then it goes back to like the beginning where the disbalance happens.
That's a good point. Totally. Yeah, it's like on the one hand, there's like substances that we use to drown out our pain and whatever we're trying to avoid. But then on the other hand, there's adaptive, healthy medications that are meant to serve us, but that we might sabotage and say, okay, but it did its purpose. Like I'm done already. Yeah, definitely. Okay, let's switch gears a little bit. Let's talk about relationships. I thought this was really interesting, exciting, and you brought it up very intuitively. So I'm excited about this. Yeah. So how does self-sabotaging, how does that show up in relationships, right? Typically having and like developing like a really deep connection with somebody, a deep relationship with somebody requires vulnerability, right? We talked about that. I love that at this point, almost everything we talk about, it also, there's like a callback to a different episode.
Yeah, it's like it ties together.
It all connects. Back to this, developing deep relationships lead to vulnerability, right? It requires vulnerability. That process can make some people like insecure about the potential loss of that relationship, right? If they have insecure attachment, anxious attachment, those kinds of things. And then their self-esteem and uncomfortable feelings and like fears around that can surface. And so that triggers these self-sabotaging behaviors. Like, you really want to continue to get close to somebody, but you're afraid the other shoe's going to drop and something's going to happen. So before that does, you push somebody away. You say something mean that you don't mean. Yeah. You try to find something that you can be like, okay, see, right there, that's why we're done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Exactly.
I've
it's
seen
that
that a
desire
lot.
to, what was that?
I said I've seen that a lot, like, myself and others. Yeah.
I think we're all prone to those kinds of things when we care, right? When we don't know how to cope in adaptive ways. Again, see, there it is again. It's all those maladaptive coping skills.
Right.
So the desire to basically avoid this emotional pain and protect themselves usually can be one of the reasons, or one of the main reasons, for sabotaging relationships. So being able to explore some of those emotions and fears, in therapy or by yourself, or what have you, can be really, really crucial to breaking out of those patterns, right? I also read in I think it was a Very Well Mind article, that there was a study that was done on self-sabotage. And there were 15 psychologists that were specializing in romantic relationships in Australia, random fun fact, that identified that the main issues for the prevalence of self-sabotage in romantic relationships were the following. There was insecure attachment styles, low self-esteem, fear of getting hurt, fear of commitment, unhealthy relationship beliefs, and coping problems, maladaptive coping. That makes sense, right? Yeah. That feels like it lines up to what we're talking about.
Absolutely.
We actually brought up the idea of low self-esteem a few times, so I kind of want to dig into that for a second. So low self-esteem, basically, how it all ties in, is that people with low self-esteem, they tend to behave in ways that confirm their negative beliefs about themselves, right? Again, our brain likes to create actions that align with what we think up here, so that it's not this opposing thoughts that are fighting in our heads.
Yeah.
So if they're close to, basically having a successful relationship, or feeling happy or feeling calm, they start to become uncomfortable, because maybe they're used to a little bit of chaos. Maybe they're used to a little bit of anxiety, right? So their bodies are not used to that level of safety. So they start to look for those issues, right? Or it could also be tied to other people telling them most of their life that, you're going to fail, or relationships look like this, not this, those kinds of things. So people showing this behavior, like we were talking about earlier, they struggle with this cognitive dissonance. And to give you a quick definition, cognitive dissonance, according to them, is a mental discomfort you may have holding two conflicting ideas at the same time. Human beings like to have consistency between their beliefs and actions. Yeah. Let's see. I have a couple of examples of this. I know you got it. You did really well. But here, we're going to give you a couple more.
Give me more. It is abstract concept.
Yeah. It is a little bit. Here was a work-related example. You're about to land a great client and earn more money than ever before. Rather than do what it takes to propel yourself forward, you hold back because you don't feel worthy of it. So you self-sabotage.
So that's that cognitive dissonance, right? That the thoughts and beliefs are that you're unworthy, but the opportunities and actions that are happening around you show that you are worthy. So it's that.
Sort of. So you have this goal in mind, right? That goal of, I want to get this client, make more money. That's that one belief that's at war with the internal belief of, I'm not worthy of it though, but I want it, but I'm not worthy of it. That dissonance.
Yes. That makes sense.
Yeah. So basically in that example, I think this is what I was pulling from. So that person gets drunk the night before the client meeting and then misses it entirely. So rather than moving ahead, their actions kind of screw things up for them.
Right. And the cognitive dissonance is that they really want that promotion, but internally they don't feel worthy.
They don't feel worthy. So they self-sabotage by going out getting drunk the night before and then missing the meeting.
And it's all subconsciously.
Yeah.
So I think that could be parallel to relationships too, right? Your internal beliefs that you believe that you are not worthy of a loving relationship, but you want it, and there's an opportunity for it.
Yeah.
And so when that dissonance happens, you push away or find one reason to fixate on.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing though, right? it's our perceptions, it's our beliefs up here in our head that basically end up one way or the other creating our realities. Which is why it's so important to like pay attention to that voice up here.
It's so fascinating. Our brains are so powerful.
They really are. It really is fascinating. Okay, so we talked a lot about what it looks like. Let's talk about how to stop it.
Okay.
How to stop self-sabotaging.
Okay.
First, as always, with literally any problem, we have to understand it, right? We have to examine it. We have to get curious to it. So first is examining, what are the root causes of this? What are the triggers for this? And so, like we talked about, right? It's a little bit unconscious. You might not always know. So how do you identify a trigger if you don't know? It gets a little tricky, but we still can, right? So our harmful thought patterns can occur like, automatically without that conscious processing. But if we're trying to uncover those, we can try and bring more consciousness to them. So what that looks like is maybe taking a note every time that you have some kind of like distressing emotion and taking a pause and thinking, okay, what was the thought that might have triggered this feeling for me, right? Because our feelings don't just happen. Our feelings always happen as a result of some belief, some thought, some perception that we have. So being able to like think about it from that way, work backwards, can help us start to be more aware and more conscious of those thoughts, of those root triggers.
Yeah. That makes sense. Change the narrative by becoming aware of it, challenging it.
Yes, exactly. First, you got to get curious to what it is. Once you can identify it, keep being curious and gently challenge it.
Gently.
You don't want to push it off a cliff. We're going to nudge it.
There you go. Move. Get out the way.
Startle it off. This is more spooky behavior. Now our scary movie has a murder, apparently. Oh, goodness. So, yeah, we first start with the examination of those root causes of the triggers, right? That's really like the foundation of it. But let's talk about what it can look like in like relationships and how to stop it in relationships. So first, like we talked about earlier, it's important to recognize that some of these like childhood wounds, relationships, previous relationships can all like show up as baggage in these current relationships that lead to self-sabotage. So just like with the foundation that we talked about, identifying the current triggers for those self-sabotaging behaviors is important. And that can look like you pick fights, or blame your partner, those kinds of things. What are those behaviors that you do that are clearly self-sabotaging because they don't serve you? Yeah. They don't serve anything other than create more distance. Right. That's self-sabotaging. And then figuring out, again, through journaling. Journaling is powerful. I know nobody likes to do it, but it can be helpful. I like really do think journaling is powerful because think about it. Like with self-sabotage, your subconscious is so relevant. Your journaling practices can help those subconscious thoughts come out on paper and then become aware of them. Like it's so powerful. Exactly. Plus, we are kind of forgetful creatures. And if we want to remember like our wins and successes, we have to write them down. Exactly. Just journal. 5 minutes.
5 minutes. I need to do that. I haven't done that in a while. I need to do it.
Honestly, neither have I. But
it makes a big difference. Yeah. I'm getting that, girl.
You're like, I need it. It's telling me. It's tapping me on the shoulder.
It's time. It's time.
It's time. So this is your homework, Michelle. Go journal sometime this week.
I will.
And then text me when you do it. I will. Keep you honest.
There you go.
So in this journaling, we can really learn to like tolerate some of this discomfort and respond with healthier behavior when we can understand why we're uncomfortable. Why are we feeling distressed emotions? What was that thought? If we can understand it, we can learn to swap these maladaptive coping, self-sabotage, with more adaptive ones. And usually that happens through like communication. Yes. Right. It's kind of a cornerstone in any relationship, but being able to like understand like, okay, I blame my partner because if I didn't blame my partner and I wasn't quick to do that defensively, then I would have to contend with the icky feelings that I have about guilt or shame. Yeah. But that's not serving you or the relationship or your partner to blame, right? So being able to learn how to sit in the discomfort, breathe through the icky feelings, hear your thoughts, and then being able to like gently challenge those thoughts. That's important in changing that behavior, because once you start to be curious and like start making space for it and validating yourself and taking away some of those like avoidance behaviors, you can now sit in that discomfort and say, you know what, I did do that. I'm so sorry that I did that. Rather than saying, oh, well, you did this, you know? Yeah, I think that's it in terms of relationships that I wanted to hit on. Let's talk about self-sabotage and like success. This one was a little bit baffling to me at first before I like really understood it, but basically like understanding what patterns hinder your success. For example, as an umbrella of that, like procrastination behavior, your low self-esteem, poor financial choices, decision making. Those can all fall under the category of like what's sabotaging your success. And like with the other things, identify the trigger for that behavior and then make a plan of action on how you want to deal with that. Right? This is why it's the foundation. If we don't understand why we do what we do, we cannot change that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. They give a cool example that I really liked. It said, basically, if negativity is a problem at work, plan to make one positive comment each day and embrace improvements rather than elimination to make incremental progress towards your goal. It's a very growth mindset, right?
Right.
I love that.
Absolutely.
Okay, 2 more. Let's talk about procrastination and perfectionist thinking.
Okay.
First, for stopping procrastinating, it's helpful to start the task without thinking about the entire project or timeline. Right. So a big part of procrastination is like you are too focused on the effort and the amount of time the work is going to take instead of just doing it so that it can be done.
Right.
So being able to like focus on the present, like what's that first step in front of me that I need to take?
Yeah.
Breaking it down into like easily bite-sized pieces.
Right.
Instead of trying to tackle it as like a whole in your mind can sometimes take away from that avoidance that is procrastinating. So being able to anticipate your future behavior can be helpful. Planning on how you want to respond when you anticipate it can be helpful. Eliminating like the distractions that really truly distract you and those maladaptive coping mechanisms can be helpful as you're learning this skill. One study actually that I found that they referred to was connected on like academic environments on students. And scientists found that there's one common factor in procrastination involved a lack of self-regulation. I love that. Like you wouldn't think that is the most obvious thing, but it is, isn't it? Because it's about coping.
It is.
So basically the article says that this is due to the standards of having a large degree of freedom, temptations, and distractions, and long deadlines that, you know, you get in university, right? So the peer influence or social factors also influences procrastination. And finally, a lack of skills in the area of studying skills can also contribute to procrastination. So it's just this like big ball of all sorts of things that can lead to procrastination, especially when you're, you know, studying and you're in that like early college, just out of high school, just out of mom and dad's grasp kind of phase of life. But a big part of that too, like if you look at the underlying underlying skill, it's a lack of self-regulation skills. If you know how to self-regulate,
right,
you can make more intentional choices.
Yeah, because emotions can really mess with your reasoning.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
So if emotional regulation is not there, then it's hard to kind of be more aware in the moment of your thinking patterns or what's happening in the moment, right? It's hard to be curious of what you're thinking is what you're thinking and why are those thoughts there?
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly. Let's talk about perfectionist thinking. So stopping perfectionist thinking. To talk about this, I think it's important to recognize that maybe as a perfectionist, like you overthink, right? Every single detail, it has to be just right.
Right.
So not necessarily doing away with that, but kind of tweaking that, right? It's not about perfectionism. It's about aiming for your best. So like strive for your excellence, but not perfection. Not impossible standards, high standards.
Yes.
Right? So make those like tiny little tweaks.
Right.
Start
Give yourself
somewhere.
grace. Yeah.
Yeah. Give yourself grace and just start somewhere, right?
Yeah.
Make small improvements because that's better than no improvements because you're so stuck.
And I've noticed with my perfectionism too, like celebrating the small wins can help decrease that perfectionism. Like I was able to do this, you know, or like even though I wasn't able to achieve this impossible standard, I was able to achieve this standard.
Yeah. I love it. Yeah. Celebrate all wins.
Yeah.
Big,
Big
small,
or
medium,
small.
don't care. Celebrate that. And I mean, maybe I would even add to that and say, like, sometimes it's okay to just celebrate just for doing it. Even if it wasn't like a win, like just celebrate it anyway. You did the thing you didn't want to do and like you still showed up. Like, okay, it wasn't your best effort, but you know what? You didn't want to do it and you still did.
Yeah, for sure.
And so this article, like in Very Well Mind that I was talking about, they had these questions that you can ask yourself, like if you think you're self-sabotaging. So I wanted to go over those. I thought they were kind of interesting. These are the questions that Very Well Mind says you can ask yourself if you think you're self-sabotaging. 1, is your behavior aligning with your goals? Because if it's not, possibly you're self-sabotaging. If you constantly feel like you're not able to reach that. Or if you feel like you're stuck and not making progress towards the goal.
Right.
And if that's not it, then what is stopping you from taking action to make your dreams come true? Again, curious, loving, compassionate questions. These are not shaming questions, but curiously, what's stopping you? Be honest with yourself. Exactly. And then it says, is your behavior aligning with the values that you currently believe? Right. So again, it's all about like that alignment, right? And if not, what is stopping you from taking actions that align with these values? Right. Do you feel uneasiness or discomfort when you progress? If yes, dig deeper. Is that discomfort based on what others told you that limited your aspirations? Is that discomfort based on a fear of failure and worrying about looking foolish? Is that unease because of a fear of success and what that might mean? Interesting. All good, impactful questions.
Yeah, very impactful.
And the last 2 were, are you concerned with achieving more than you thought possible? And if you do better or achieve more, do you believe success is more than you deserve? I like those questions. I think they're very like straight to the point.
They are.
But as long as you treat them like with curiosity to like really try and understand, I think that could be a helpful tool. But if you treat them like, this was too direct, this hurts my feelings, go away. Like if you're judging these answers, I don't think that can be really helpful, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, that was my research. Let's talk a little bit about how self-sabotage can show up for South Asians.
The juicy part.
Yeah, this is the juicy stuff. This is what everybody waits for with their chai.
I get excited for this too. Where's my chai for son?
Yeah, we gotta spill the tea.
There you go.
Let's see. So perhaps maybe not as surprising, but I didn't actually find a lot of things directly related to self-sabotage in South Asians. But I found this, what's called a blog post, I guess. It was on this author's website. She's Davina Thavari. She's a registered social worker. So on her, like, I think business website, I looked through it really quickly. Yeah. I found this article. So maybe it's a blog post. Okay. And it was on how South Asian parenting behaviors impact self-esteem. So it's more about self-esteem, but I think that can still be very indicative of self-sabotaging behavior because self-esteem also relates to self-sabotaging behavior. Right. So I want to pick out 3 specific things that she said that I want to highlight. One was that your parents may hold unrealistic expectations for you in terms of your school performance, career path, achievements, financial status, relationship and family status, and other factors that are often valued in like the South Asian culture. Yeah. As a result, you may have faced constant criticism where your choices, decisions, and actions were critiqued, particularly when this deviated from the social, cultural, and or gender norms that were expected. You may have also been compared to siblings, cousins, family friends, fellow members of religious spiritual groups, acquaintances, what have you, regarding the standards that your parents may have set for you. Like, oh, look, I don't know, Bobby's doing this. Why can't you do this?
Yeah, it's pretty common.
Look at Anjali. She's doing this amazing thing. How come you never did that? That kind of
like comparisons.
Competitive. Yeah.
Yeah. Those can be hurtful for sure.
Yeah, exactly. And so these are all ways that really impact our self-esteem. And I was kind of thinking about it and trying to frame it in terms of self-sabotage. And what I was thinking about is how all of these things definitely impact our self-esteem. But, they also like create these narratives in our mind of what we should and shouldn't do, what we can't and could do, right? And so all of those kinds of limiting thoughts about what we can and can't do, should and shouldn't do, those are also pathways to self-sabotaging behavior, right? Because again, of those cognitive dissonance that we were talking about. If my goal is like I wanted to be a therapist when I was really young, before I even knew what that meant. And, you know, I had very like typical parents who were like, I don't know what that is. Are you going to make a lot of money? I don't think so. You should be a doctor, you know?
Yeah.
And I was kind of told, like, you should be a doctor. You will make money this way. You won't make money as a therapist.
Yes.
Don't do that. We don't know what that looks like. And for a while, I did have that cognitive dissonance of where I kind of like people pleased and gave into that. And, you know, colossal dumpster fire that didn't work out. We already know I failed genetics twice. We're not going to get into it. But, you know, it's that cognitive dissonance over time that will not be able to withstand. But it just creates all of this like ickiness and like it just creates a lot of havoc, because when you start to fail at the thing that you're telling yourself you should do but you don't want to do,
right,
not only are you failing perhaps at the thing that you don't want to do, you're also leaning on very maladaptive coping skills to do so, to distract yourself from it. And who's that going to serve? Really no one. So this self-sabotage can, you know, again, right, like we've been talking about, it can come in lots of different forms: procrastination, the avoidance of something, the people pleasing. It can come from those roots of like fear of being unworthy, fear of failing. Usually it's just a hot ball of mess. Basically.
It is. Absolutely.
Yeah. And, you know, at the beginning I told you, right, like this actually came about because I was doing a post on self-sabotaging on my Instagram, Try with Anisha. So I wanted to talk about a few of the things that I said that really resonated with people. And these are things that I've kind of picked up from like personal experiences, professional experiences that I think are pretty common.
Okay.
So here we go. The first one that I chose to talk about was like, don't say yes when you actually mean no.
Oh,
That's like people pleaser 101, right? We tend to say yes when we really just want to say no way. And we've talked about this a lot, but like, why? Well, because it's going to lead to a lot of resentment, right? And disappointment, anger in yourself. And you're going to start acting out like maybe passive aggressively. That's just not going to serve you or the relationship with this person. And that's self-sabotaging. Yeah. The other thing, which I kind of hinted on earlier, but we didn't really talk about, is seeing things as all or nothing, black and white. That's kind of another form of self-sabotage if you really think about it, because things don't work in an all or nothing, clean cut boxes. Most things are in the gray. And if you see it as all or nothing, then you stop yourself from growing and learning and being happy, right? If you only see things as this was a success or this was a failure, that's not helpful. What about all the things that you learned? What about all the things that you gained? You don't, you know, value those things. Another example would be, don't expect, this is my cute little way of saying it, don't expect all the stars to align. Basically what I mean by that is like, don't let that perfectionist, it has to look this way, stop you from starting, from doing. Just pick somewhere to start and just start. Baby step, bite-sized pieces, right? We can't always have it look exactly the way we want. I know most of us tend to be control freaks, me included, but that's not helpful. So just starting to try to break it up in bite-sized pieces and just start somewhere that can at least get the ball rolling, the momentum going.
Absolutely.
And then the fourth one was more related, geared towards like relationships. Stop assuming. When we assume something and when we like witness something, whether it's something somebody says or something somebody does, we experience that through like a filter. That is our perception. And our perceptions are not always true. So we can get upset for no reason because of our perception that may not even be true. Right? So, you know, for example, let's say somebody, like one of your partners is tasked to do with the dishes, and you told that person the day before, and then you just check in the next day and you're like, hey, did you do the dishes? And maybe they're thinking in their head, their perception, that filter is saying, oh, she's about to like yell at me, or he's about to be mad because like this person asked me and I still haven't done it. Ugh. So instead of just being like, no, you say, I'm going to do it. Like, oh. And the other partner's like, whoa, where did that defensiveness come from? I just meant I have this like dirty dish that I want to put in the dishwasher if you haven't already started. See, the perception was they're going to yell at me. That wasn't reality, right?
That's
so instead of assuming things, instead of assuming things, just call it out. Call it out. Don't assume things. It's not helpful.
Absolutely.
You're going to end up self-sabotaging yourself because you might be upset. And like, if you don't call it out, you're going to hold that upsetness tight in your chest, and that's going to just create resentment. Okay, 2 more. 1, don't let failures stop you. I have talked about growth mindset so much, but it's my favorite thing.
Yeah.
Failures need to be stepping stones. Because that's what they are. But if you don't see them that way, you put them in yeah, exactly. If you put them in this all or nothing bucket, it doesn't serve you. It stops you from going after the thing you want. But if you see it as a stepping stone, you're constantly like, okay, what's the next thing? What's the thing I learned? Okay, how can I pivot? And how can I do something else to get to my goal? You're never going to get to your goal if you don't take that shot. What was that quote? You miss 100% of the shots you don't take, by Michael Gretzky.
Oh, I don't know who it is.
I might be butchering this quote and this name, but something like that, similar to that.
Yes.
Let's see. And the last one is basically stop doing things solo. It's okay to ask for help. It's okay to lean on support. It doesn't mean that you didn't accomplish that. Right. It doesn't take away from your success. If you really think about it, every successful or great person or what have you, they have all received some kind of help, some kind of support system with them. Okay, that's it. That's all the examples, all the stuff on self-sabotage.
Oh, this is good information. The examples are really helpful to make this like really abstract concept to be concrete. So thank you for sharing good research.
Yeah, exactly. So pop quiz before we go to our stories. How do you deal with self-sabotage? What is it?
Oh, I'm going to get that to my story. Should I say it now or should I wait to my story?
No, do it.
Do it what?
I'm going to grade you. Tell me now, I'm going to grade you.
Stop assuming, right? That's one of the tasks. Me personally, for me, assumptions is a big one, like my perception. So like taking a step back and not assume and ask questions, be curious instead of assuming what they mean behind what they just said.
No more. I want to be surprised. I want to know in your story. Okay. I'll just give you an A. Good job.
Okay. Thank you. You
passed the quiz. Okay, let me talk about my story real quick, and then I want to hear the rest of your story.
Okay, I'm excited.
For my story, I think more and more lately I've just been doing reflections more than stories. So today's kind of the same. Yeah. I've reflected on how I've self-sabotaged, and what I came up with was, I think, 3 main things typically in how I have tended to self-sabotage. So one of them is definitely like, I was a big say yes when I meant no kind of a person. Yeah, particularly, I think this showed up a lot like for social plans. And as we've kind of talked about already, like that's very much rooted in my people-pleasing tendencies that I gained from childhood, right? Like I said, I was always told that I was very flexible and like nice and like, oh, she's so like sweet. So like I was the good girl, and I like that. I mean, who doesn't want to be when you're young called, oh, you're so good, right? So like I ate that up, but what that meant was I stopped prioritizing my needs. Not that I ever did, I guess, growing up, to stop.
Yeah.
And then perfectionism and procrastination, I definitely had a bout of that, particularly I think in more academic settings, but also like personal life. So I was thinking about it, and I have a complicated relationship with like health because of the South Asian like
stigma.
Not even stigma, it's just like the norms, the beliefs around like working out, and then being a woman and working out, and then like quote unquote dieting and like those kinds of things. So I've always had like a weird relationship with health for a long time, and I would get stuck in like my own kind of like limiting beliefs of how things had to look, and it's like, no, it has to be this or nothing. Like that's not really helpful. Right. More lately, I think it's also shown up as like business oriented stuff, the things that I've been scared to do, again, tied to that same theme of it's my thoughts that were limiting me and telling me what I can't or couldn't do. Like, oh, I can't put my face on my social media accounts to market. That's too scary or cringy or like whatever, like these limiting thoughts that I had around it. Yeah. And even like the business admin stuff, like, I've talked a lot about how I've hated being a business owner and how I just wanted to be a therapist. And that's it. Yeah. But again, like that's what I am. I am a business owner. I cannot separate that just because I want to separate that. Just because I tell myself again and again, I'm not good at the business stuff, I'm not good at this, then obviously I'm not going to try. Right. So a lot of my problems with perfectionism and procrastination came a lot from my own like limiting thoughts about what I could and couldn't do. And typically like my distractors were TV. Lots and lots of TV time. And then to kind of round this out, I think I want to talk about relationships real quick. So the other way that my self-sabotaging would show up is like in relationships with Adi, like especially when we were first dating and everything. I, again, right, the whole like good girl complex.
Yeah.
I was not speaking my truths. I did not know how to do that. I wanted to make too much space for other people and less for myself. So because I've always been told, you know, again, right, like I'm a good girl, you're easy, you're so flexible, you're so like whatever, blah, blah, blah. And obviously, like I would want other people to think that, and especially the person I'm like romantically with, I would want them to see me as like caring and loving and all that. But I took it too far, right? I would be all the way on the other end that that made no room for me to exist, for my needs and wants to exist. Because again, like you know, Adi, he's not a people pleaser. He's very much like boom, boom. I've got my boundaries. I'm gonna do what I do. He doesn't have a lot of experience dealing with people pleasers. So I feel like he obviously couldn't understand where I was coming from. He would take what I would say at like face value. And so what would end up happening is like, oh no, it's okay, I don't want that. You have that. And then he'll have it. And I'm like, the hell? You didn't want to like share that? But I wouldn't say that out loud. I would think it. And then eventually like that would make me really resentful, right?
Right.
And before I knew like, okay, it's me, I'm the problem here. Before I would be able to recognize that, I would over time kind of just like suffer in silence, be resentful. And then eventually that started coming out in like self-sabotaging behaviors, like being upset and then not wanting to talk about why I'm upset because now I'm guilty and ashamed of why I'm upset. And then, you know, top that off, sometimes being like passive aggressive even. And like none of those were helpful, right? In me standing up for what I wanted, making space for myself, but also for him, because he's like, what's happening? I didn't do anything wrong. You said you didn't want it, and so I took it. And like logical, right?
Right.
But the other thing I've noticed is after I kind of learned that all of those like, you know, people pleasing behaviors that I was doing and all of that, you know, I've kind of talked to you, right, about how I swung far to the other side of that spectrum. And for a really long time, and even like recently, I was struggling to be compromising and to give space to others because I've like deprived myself for so long. And I was like, no, screw everybody. I'm the priority. What I want, that's all that matters. I'm like, even that's not helpful, right? That's too extreme. That's not going to foster relationships either.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, exactly. It's about balance. But I'm working on it. I think we found somewhat of a balance. Still a work in progress.
Yes, it is. Big change. It's like really easy to move from the other side because that's good progress. Then now it's like, okay, we have boundaries now. Like, like how can we meet in the middle?
Exactly. So that's my reflection on how I think I have historically self-sabotaged. But I don't know, stay tuned. It's not perfect. I'm probably going to self-sabotage again about something else.
And that's okay. It's, you know, it's not a straight line healing, right? So I appreciate you sharing and being vulnerable and sharing, just like really, really relate to your reflection too and story. And I'm sure a lot of listeners can too, right? Like, I think your piece of like sharing that last bite of like, oh yeah, you can have it. But then when they eat it, like that's happened to me. And I'm like, you didn't give me half of that last bite. Yeah. But it's like, you know, it's like the self-sabotaging behavior is that because I have people-pleasing tendencies, I will expect you to also have a people-pleasing tendency, even though that's not healthy. So like, even though I said, even though I said I don't want the last bite and you didn't give it to me and I expected you to still give it to me, like for us to go back and forth, that was hard because it helps you realize that, oh, people-pleasing tendency is not normal. Right? Like,
exactly. Not everyone's wired that way. That's not healthy.
Right. Thank you for sharing. That was good. It was good research and good reflection.
Thank you. Now tell me the rest of your story.
Okay. So I made sure to not do any research or look up self-sabotage and kind of really went on to like my perception of it. When I first thought of it, and after kind of listening to your like research and story as well, I kind of think, and it literally aligns with our horror film like analogy, like self-sabotage is like that shadow behind you that like, you know, might grow over time through trauma or like, you know, like you said in South Asian households, like comparison or like the low gagging, whatever it is that feeds into that, like that shadow that makes you do things due to cognitive dissonance. right? Like it's
Mm.
self-sabotaging is an action. So like it's that shadow that's like making you do things subconsciously.
Oh, like the devil on your shoulder
Yeah,
type.
or like just
Yeah.
like yeah, something behind you. So that's kind of like where my brain goes.
Mm,
And I think like the bigger it is, the more self-sabotaging you tend to do, or more subconsciously. Um,
sure.
and the kind of like the path towards healing is kind of shrink it and let it not like overpower what you're doing and what your actions are, your thought patterns. So like for me, I think historically when I think of my self-sabotaging behaviors and what I feel like I've engaged in is kind of like my habit of overthinking a lot. And then combined with my past experience with relationships. And so like before my relationship with my current husband, like my romantic relationships were not good. Like, you know, I went through dishonesty and like people going behind my back. Growing up too, I didn't really observe like a really loving, positive relationship in my household, like not even to the point where like anniversaries weren't celebrated, birthdays weren't celebrated. Like that was just like what I grew up with. And so like my kind of sense of self, or like my narrative that I had developed in myself with those experiences, that I don't really deserve, or there's no such thing, and like I don't deserve like a loving, healthy, romantic relationship. And so
You
that
deserve all the things. I'm just
oh,
gonna
you're
jump
so
in there real
sweet.
quick.
Thank you.
You deserve all the
So
things. Too
you're so
sweet.
sweet.
Okay, keep
I love you.
going.
So when it was time, when I started dating my current husband, right, like immediately I started engaging in self-sabotaging behaviors from the beginning, right? Like I had that cognitive dissonance where the internal beliefs were like, this is not real, like something's going to happen, like I'm not deserving of a healthy, loving relationship. But then the outside thoughts were like, this is amazing, I really want this to keep going. And so some self-sabotaging behaviors I engaged in at that time was like making assumptions, being hyper fixated on small things, like creating, like overthinking, creating my own scenarios and narratives, assuming that he did one thing, so he means this, like instead of asking, like making assumptions and kind of really spiraling. And it took a lot of energy. And what's so insane is that when I was reflecting on this, I would think my overthinking, self-sabotaging behavior wasn't even self-sabotaging. It was like a strength. I was like, oh, I'm such a good thinker. Like it makes me anticipate all the things that can come my way. It's preparing me to be ready. Like it's helping me prepare for the worst, but I have to hope for the best, right? Like all those narratives. Like I thought that was like amazing, but it was self-destructive. And, I was spending so much energy and time thinking about the same thing, the same scenario over and over again, and wondering like any conflict I would go through, or any assumptions I've made in relationships or work related or professional work environments. Like if I'm worried about something or I'm making assumptions, my self-sabotaging behavior would be like thinking of that scenario over and over again. What could I have said and done differently? What someone else could have done differently? And it was just taking so much time and energy. It was draining. And, I think what really helped me come out of that was like journaling. I think that was like really helpful, especially with like my romantic relationship struggles in the beginning, where I was like kind of writing down what I was feeling and thought and thinking, and putting those subconscious thoughts down. And through that journaling, I was able to also do positive self-talk, which that helped as well. Um, yeah, which was really nice. Like it's so cheesy though. Some of my journal entries are like, Michelle, you deserve the love like that you have. Like it's so cheesy and corny, but like it really did help. It helped me challenge those assumptions and those self-sabotaging, overthinking behaviors. Um, so like once I consciously like stopped, was once I became conscious of that and started journaling, working through that, I really felt free. Like it was almost as if like I had more time in my hands. Like the overthinking at points like got so bad where I would be just like sitting on the couch or on the phone with my sister for hours talking about the same scenario. So it was really freeing. Like I was like, this is really, really great that I was able to like really challenge this type of behavior that kept coming up and feel free. Another thing, overthinking, self-sabotage behavior came up too, was just like anticipating things, catastrophizing, thinking about the worst, and stressing about it. Like it was almost as if like things hadn't even happened yet, and I would stress about it, of that thing. Like it hadn't even happened yet. And that was also very self-sabotaging because it was making me stressed. I wasn't able to focus on other things that are actually happening, being present in other, like, being present in my relationships, like just like that overthinking was taking over. And I really want to say that this was very heavily modeled for me growing up. Overthinking, unnecessarily stressing about different things are all actions that I see people in our South Asian community continuously practice. And people don't understand that even though these might be protective or maladaptive coping mechanisms, they are maladaptive. They can become toxic and unhealthy, and they can lead to self-sabotage. Right. And I get if we dive deep into it a little bit more, like overthinking might be a protective mechanism that was helpful when, a lot of South Asian families did immigrate. My parents immigrated. They had to really think of all the things that they need to do to adjust, to assimilate in this new environment. But it really translated into their relationships, their way of life. And that's when it became self-sabotage. And so growing up, I thought that was normal. Like my mom would out loud practice overthinking and making assumptions, or react emotionally to things, making assumptions. So I would say until very recently, well into my adulthood, is when I realized that this is not normal. Like, this is self-sabotage, and there's really no point of stressing about something that hasn't happened yet. There's no need to overthink about things that I don't even know if they're true, right? Like, is my brain making up those narratives? Let's ask questions. Let's be curious, right? Like you said, let's do things at face value instead of overthinking of what the other person is saying. And so that was really helpful to come out of. And, I'm still working on it. Sometimes I backtrack, like you said, like we are all a work in progress, but it really has helped me not only come out of it myself, but challenge my loved ones when they're practicing it. Like very recently, my mom was stressing about something that hadn't happened yet, or there was a chance of happening, but it hadn't happened yet. So I really was able to respectfully and compassionately challenge it. Be like, Mom, there's no need for us to think about this event if it hasn't happened yet. Let's wait. What if it doesn't happen, right? We'll tackle that issue when it comes to us. There's no need for us to think about that. And she was like, oh, okay, you're right. So that was really cool. I was like, that this is, but it is, like you said, it is a maladaptive coping mechanism that might have been adopted by our, in our culture in South Asian community due to immigration, due to trauma that they've experienced in the past. And now it's just become a part of life, and could be related to lots of health concerns, right? Like we've talked about in the past, stress levels. And so that's my little take on self-sabotage.
And I really truly love so much that I get these glimpses into how the way that you've healed for you, how much it's freed you and liberated you. And as much as you deserve that, I want that for you. What also excites me is not only has it shifted and changed your life, you find ways to kind of subtly and transform other people's lives and be like, hey, see this thing? And that's awesome, isn't it? Your healing isn't just your healing. I mean, obviously you went for you, which is important. But yeah, it does. It kind of spreads. And not just, usually when we talk about it, as therapists, we talk about how healing is about it stops with us for future generations. But it's also kind of cool to see that those of us in our lives who are willing to grow with us, it can impact them too. It's not just about future generations. It's about the current generation too.
It is.
Previous generations, and sometimes. That's so fascinating.
It is fascinating. And now just working towards making that shadow smaller and smaller. Don't listen to it anymore.
You're not helpful. Stop it.
Yes. But, it's really important to recognize and be more aware of this, because it really helps you come out of it.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing that. I love it. And I also love, in order to really shift other people's lives and help them grow with us, they have to be willing to do it. So I really love that, we use examples of how, sometimes your mom or whoever, they're willing to do that. They're willing to let you place a calming kind of presence for them to change, even if it's one instance, to change that. And hopefully that one instance, maybe that is something that person will remember the next time it happens.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So exciting. Props to Auntie.
Thanks.
Props to you.
Thanks.
Always, as always,
Yes,
very,
you
very
too.
proud of you, darling.
You too, girl.
Shall we wrap up for today then?
Yes. All right. Our wonderful listeners out there, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate each and every one of you. If you haven't given us a follow in our social media or Spotify, please follow and subscribe. Our handle is @TalksSouthAsian to me. And you can also email us any feedback, comments, questions at talksouthaasiantome@gmail.com. All right. See you next time.
Bye.